Wyoming Territory. Summer of 1878, the sun beat down hard on the dusty main street of Rawlins, filling the air with heat and dry silence, broken only by the murmurs of a crowd gathering near the livery yard. Yates Johnson pulled his worn hat lower over his brow, boots crunching on the gravel as he edged closer to the commotion. He had just come in from a 3-week cattle drive, pockets near empty, skin burned and muscles aching. All he wanted was a bath, a meal, and maybe a quiet place to sleep. But the sound of a child crying stopped him cold. He turned the corner and saw them. A woman, no older than 23, stood stiff-backed in a threadbare blue dress, her arms wrapped tight around a little girl with tangled blonde hair. A man in a sheriff's badge, who Yates knew was no better than a snake, stood beside them. A sign nailed to a post read, "Debt auction, 1 woman and child, labor only, no ownership claimed." Yates stared in disbelief. "You have got to be joking," he muttered. "Sheriff says the husband's dead," someone whispered beside him. "Left him with nothing. She tried to work it off, but she still owes money to the general store. Sheriff figures she can be leased till it's paid." Yates looked back at the woman. Her chin was up, but her hands trembled as she held her daughter. She looked like she wanted to disappear. The sheriff raised his voice. "Name's Lark Jennings. Girl's name is Ella. We start at $20 for 1 month of labor, housework, cookin', child care. Quiet, clean, no trouble." Yates had $23 in his pocket, that was all. No savings, no land, no family left to call. He should have walked away, but something in her eyes, proud, scared, holding tight to that little girl, dug deep into him. 23, Yates said, heads turned. The sheriff blinked. "You sure, mister?" I said 23. His voice was steady. "That's all I got. No one else," the sheriff called. Silence. The crowd began to murmur, disappointed there would be no bidding war. "Sold," the sheriff muttered. He handed over a torn slip of paper. "You get 1 month. After that, we talk again." Yates stepped forward. Lark's eyes met his, cautious, startled, but not unkind. Ella peeked up from her mother's skirt, wide-eyed and silent. "I won't hurt you," Yates said gently. "You'll come home with me. Got a cabin out near Miller Creek. It's quiet, you'll be safe." Lark nodded slowly. She didn't say thank you. She didn't cry. She just adjusted her grip on Ella and followed him. They walked quietly through town. Yates led his horse and Lark walked beside him, barefoot in the dust, Ella clutching a rag doll in one arm and her mother's hand in the other. When they reached the edge of town, Yates helped them onto the horse and walked beside it. It was a long ride, and the sun was dropping behind the hills when they reached his land, a small cabin tucked into a grove of cottonwoods near a creek. The place was humble, just 1 room and a lean-to barn, but it was clean and honest. "I know it ain't much," Yates said, turning to them. "But it's yours while you're here." Lark looked around slowly, then down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep against her. "It's enough," she said quietly. Inside, Yates lit a lamp and stirred the coals in the stove. He pulled out a sack of beans and a small jar of salt. "I'll cook," he offered. Lark stepped closer. "Let me." He hesitated, then handed her the spoon. She moved around the stove like she had done it 100 times before, her hands swift and calming. Ella slept on a folded blanket in the corner. They ate in silence. Afterward, Yates offered her the bed. "I'll sleep outside," he said. "You do not have to." "I want to," he replied. "You and the little one deserve the bed." She watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. That night, Yates slept under the stars, a rifle by his side and the soft sound of the creek nearby. He stared up at the sky, thinking about how his life had changed in a single evening. He had nothing left now, no cattle, no money, not even a bed, but he had brought them home, and somehow that felt like more than he had ever owned. The next morning, Lark was already up, sweeping the porch with a pine branch. Ella sat beside her, eating a piece of cornbread. "Morning," Yates said. Lark looked up, brushing hair from her face. "I fixed some eggs." He stepped up beside her. "You did not have to." "I wanted to." He took the plate and sat down on the steps, eating slow. Ella smiled at him, crumbs on her cheek. Lark glanced at him. "Why did you do it?" He looked at her. "Because no one else did," she nodded, looking out at the land. My husband died last winter. Fever, I tried to stay. I scrubbed floors, did laundry, but the bills kept piling. I thought I could keep Ella from it. I was wrong. You are not wrong now, Yates said. You are free here. She looked at him again. You gave up everything for us. I do not regret it. She stared at him for a long time. Then she smiled, a small, quiet thing, but it made something in his chest pull tight. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a reason to stay standing. The days fell into a quiet rhythm. Yates rose early, often before the light pushed through the cottonwoods. He checked the snares he'd set near the creek, mended fence posts along the pasture line, and cleared brush near the barn where thistle had crept in thick. The work was steady, and his body had long ago learned the language of labor. Inside the cabin, Lark took to the place like it had always belonged to her. She stitched new hems into the curtains using thread from an old tobacco tin and a needle she'd carried in her satchel. She boiled creek water before letting it touch their mouths. When she spoke to Ella, her voice softened into something warm and steady, like a lullaby that never needed singing. One evening, after the sun had dropped low and dusk settled like smoke across the field, Yates leaned against the porch post with a mug of boiled chicory in hand. Lark stepped out, brushing flour from her apron. You ever think about leaving Wyoming? She asked. His brow lifted. Not since I got here. My brother headed east after the war, sent word once from St. Louis, said he was teaching letters to children of freedmen. I used to think I'd go there, find him, start fresh. Why didn't you? I was 17 when I married. My folks were gone by then. He was kind but sickly. By the time Ella came, we were already behind on everything. There was no leaving after that. Yates nodded slowly, gaze fixed toward the horizon. There's a weight that comes with staying. But leaving's got its own. She studied him a moment, then said, You got people, had a father once. He drank himself into the ground in Montana Territory. I left before he did. Figured I'd make my own way, not follow his. You did, she said. He didn't answer right away. A soft wind stirred the leaves above them. I've got a neighbor, he said finally. Old widow named me. She keeps chickens and talks to them like they're church-going folk. She's been alone since the cholera took her boys. Lark leaned against the rail beside him. You trust her. She's never given me cause not to. I was thinkin'. If you ever needed someone to watch Ella when I'm out longer than a day, me might be willing. Lark looked toward the cabin window where Ella was curled on the floor with a handful of corn husks she'd turned into dolls. I'd like to meet her first. She'd expect no less, he said. After a long pause, Lark asked, What would you have done if someone had outbid you? Yates stared into the darkening trees. Didn't have a plan past that $23. She tilted her head, voice low. Then why do it? I didn't know you then, but I knew what it looked like when someone got pushed into a corner they didn't put themselves in. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It rested between them like something understood. Later that week, they walked together to Me's homestead. The old woman greeted them with a shotgun balanced across her lap and a grin that held no teeth. Lark spoke with her while Ella chased a speckled hen around the yard. By the time they left, Me had promised to watch the girl when needed, and Ella had a fresh egg tucked into her pocket. That night, with Ella asleep and the fire burning low, Yates brought out a fiddle from under the cot. The strings were worn, the body scratched, but it held tune. I didn't know you played, Lark said, folding a quilt along the bench. Only when nobody's listenin', too close. Play anyway, he did. A slow tune, something his mother used to hum before her lungs gave out in a mining camp miles north of Cheyenne. Lark sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes closed, her breathing calm and even. When the last note faded, she looked at him not with gratitude, but with recognition, like she'd seen something she hadn't expected and chose to keep it. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the quiet stretched long but easy between them. They didn't speak of the auction again. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need to be said. What had started in desperation had grown roots in something steadier, and neither of them, it seemed, was in any hurry to pull them up. The first frost came early that year, catching the late squash and beans off guard. Yates woke to a silver sheen on the windows and the faint crunch of frozen grass beneath his boots. He moved through the quiet with care, brushing a blanket over the horse, checking the roofline for leaks before the real cold set in. Inside, Lark was kneeling by the hearth, coaxing flame from kindling she'd split herself the day before. Ella still slept, curled under a quilt that Lark had pieced from old shirts Yates had nearly thrown out. The girl's breath fogged gently in the cool air. "You ever trap before?" Yates asked, setting his gloves on the table. Lark nodded. "My mother taught me to snare rabbits. We used to set lines before sunup." He studied her face. "Reckon we could use a few more hides come winter." "You show me where," she said. "I'll take care of the rest." By mid-morning, they'd followed the creek north, where the water narrowed and the banks grew thick with willows. Lark moved without hesitation, her fingers quick as she bent saplings and tied snare loops with scraps of twine. Yates watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, the sun catching flecks of frost in his beard. "Where'd you learn to do that so quiet?" he asked. "We had to keep still," she said, not looking up. "My father would say the forest hears everything and it doesn't forgive clumsy." He crouched beside her. "You miss it, the place you came from." She tied off the last line and stood. "There wasn't much left to miss by the time I left it." They walked back slow, the sun warm on their backs now. When they reached the cabin, Ella was sitting beside me on the porch, peeling apples with a paring knife dull enough to be safe. Me handed Lark a small sack of dried herbs without a word, then tipped her chin at Yates and walked off toward home. That night, Lark spooned out a stew thick with barley and squirrel meat. Yates sat across from her, pulling splinters from his palm with a needle heated over the fire. "She's taken to me," Lark said, nodding toward Ella. "She's got a good way with children," Yates replied. "Told me once that after her sons died, the quiet near drove her blind." Lark folded her hands. "I never thought I'd end up here, not just the land but the way of it, waking up without fear, cooking without counting the bites left." He looked at her. "You feel safe," she nodded once. "I do." The quiet stretched, but it wasn't empty. "I used to think I'd marry for love," she said after a while, her voice low. "But life turned fast and I stopped waiting for things like that." Yates didn't answer right away. He reached for the kettle, poured hot water into 2 tin cups and passed one to her. "I never thought I'd have someone to come home to," he said. "Didn't think I'd want it, but some things change when you're not looking." She held the cup in both hands. "You think this could last?" "I think it already has," he answered. In the dim lamplight, her eyes didn't look cautious anymore. They looked steady. Honest. Later, after Ella had fallen asleep and the fire burned low, Lark stepped outside. Yates was tending the lantern near the barn, checking the hinges on the door. "You always work this late?" she asked. "Only when there's something worth working for." She came closer, the cold air wrapping around her shoulders despite the shawl. "You've given us more than shelter." He met her gaze. "You've given me something to stay still for." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers slipping between his like it was the most natural thing in the world. They stood like that a long while, the wind stirring the grass, the stars sharp above them. No promises were spoken. None were needed. What they had was quiet and growing, and neither of them looked away. The snow came slow, in fine flakes that drifted without sound, settling into the creases of the land. By late November, the cabin stood wrapped in white, the creek slowed to a sluggish murmur beneath a crust of ice. Yates had split enough wood to last through February, and the barn was stocked with hay, thanks to a neighbor who'd traded a cord of pine for help digging a well. Lark stood over the table, oiling a pair of worn boots Yates had nearly discarded. The leather had cracked along the toe, but her hands worked the tallow deep, coaxing the stiffness out with quiet patience. "You always this good with things folks give up on?" Yates asked from the hearth, where he was stitching a rip in the saddle cinch. "Better with things that don't talk back," she said, not looking up. He chuckled under his breath, but there was no tease in her voice, just a calm steadiness that had deepened over the weeks. "Boots'll hold through winter," she added. "Might not be pretty, but they'll walk. Pretty never carried me far anyhow." She set the boots down, wiped her hands on a cloth, and turned to the window. Ella was outside with me, their laughter muffled through the glass. Me had fashioned a sled from fence rails and rope, and the girl was running alongside it, cheeks red with cold. Lark's fingers tightened around the cloth. "She asked me today if we're staying." Yates looked up. "What you tell her?" "That I didn't know yet." He nodded once, slow. "Fair enough." She leaned against the sill. "I've lived too long not knowing what comes next. Every time I thought something might hold, it slipped." Yates set the leather aside and stood. "I ain't askin' for promises." "I know." Her voice softened. "But I also know you've been setting things right for us, quiet as you do. I see it." "I do it 'cause I want to." She turned then. "I know that too." A log popped in the stove. The warmth folded around them, but the space between was heavier than usual, full of things neither had named out loud. "You ever think about marriage?" she asked. He blinked. "Not in a long while. I have." She stepped closer. "Not for love, not at first, just for safety, for Ella, for something fixed, but now—" She stopped, searching his face. He didn't move. Now I wonder if it could mean more." He reached for her hand slowly, like asking permission, and she let him take it. "I ain't much," he said. "No land papers, no bank account, no kin to speak of. But if I give you my name, it'll be yours to keep." Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm not looking for land or money, just a place where Ella can grow without fear. And where I'm not waiting to be cast off the moment I stumble. You won't be. I believe you." She stepped forward, close enough that her breath warmed his collar. "If I say yes," she said, "I want it to be honest. No preacher yet, no papers, just a promise between you and me." Yates nodded. "Then I give you mine, right here." Her lips brushed his cheek, then lingered at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't rushed, wasn't uncertain. Just a slow kindling, like the first flame coaxed from flint. Behind them, the door creaked open. Ella bounded in, snow-damp and laughing, holding a sprig of pine in her mittened hand. "Mama, look." Lark turned, smiling. "That's the prettiest thing I've seen all day." Ella beamed, then looked at Yates. "Can we hang it over the door?" He glanced at Lark, who gave a nod. "We sure can." As the girl climbed onto a stool and tied the pine sprig with a piece of twine, Yates reached for Lark's hand again. They stood there in the warm light, the scent of wood smoke rising, the snow falling soft outside, and something deeper settling in the quiet certainty of a home earned, not given. And this time it would hold. The first thaw came in the second week of March, quiet as a breath. Drips fell from the eaves, and the earth began to give beneath Yates's boots as he walked the slope behind the cabin, checking where the snowmelt had begun feeding back into the creek. He kept his steps wide, slow, watching the soil for signs of shifting. The land was softening, same as everything else. Inside, Lark was at the table, needle in hand, mending the hem of a muslin dress she'd been altering from an old feed sack. Ella sat beside her, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration as she practiced her letters on a torn scrap of paper. Yates stepped in and left his coat by the door, watching the two of them for a moment before speaking. "Ground's warming. I could break it for planting next week if the weather holds." Lark didn't look up from her stitching. "We'll need to find seed then." "I can trade for some with that Swede down near the South Ridge. He's got barley, maybe some squash." She tied off the thread and set the dress aside. "I'll ride with you. You sure?" "I've been inside too long." They left Ella with me the next morning, bundled in a shawl and carrying a basket of dried apples for the ride. The air still held chill in its teeth, but the sun was steady and bright, and the trail south was open. They rode side by side, not speaking much, but not needing to. When they reached the ridge, the old Swede greeted them with a nod and a pipe between his teeth. He had seed to spare, and a few jars of last year's preserves that he offered in exchange for a small stack of cut firewood. Deal struck. Yates packed the saddle bags while Lark wandered to the edge of the ridge where the wind brushed the grass flat. "You thinking of something?" Yates asked as he came up behind her. I'm thinking how strange it is to feel like I belong somewhere again." He gave a quiet hum. "You do?" She turned to him. "You still want me to carry your name?" He met her eyes. "Only if you want to, I do," she said, voice sure. "And not out of need, not for safety, because I've come to love this place, you, the way you hold quiet like it's something sacred. The way you never ask for more than I can give." He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "Then let's call it settled." They rode back slow, the snow now only a memory in the low places, the land stretching wide and open around them. The planting came in fits, between cold rains and sudden warm spells. Lark dug rows with a sharpened stick while Yates hauled water from the creek. Ella helped where she could, her hands small but eager. Lark taught her to tuck seeds gently beneath the soil, like laying them to sleep. By late spring, green shoots broke through the earth. The barley came up first, pale and stubborn, followed by the squash vines that curled like question marks across the tilled rows. Yates built a fence by hand, post by post, to keep the deer at bay. One evening, as the sun slipped low, Yates stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Lark and Ella pick wild onions near the edge of the clearing. Lark bent low, her hair loose down her back, sunlight catching in it like the last of the firelight. Ella darted beside her, laughing at something only the two of them understood. Yates felt the weight in his chest shift, like something long buried had finally settled into place. That night, once Ella had gone to sleep, Lark took his hand and led him outside. The stars stretched wide overhead and the scent of pine hung thick in the air. "I've been thinking," she said, her thumb brushing the back of his hand. I want to build something here, not just a home, but a life with you, with her. Something that doesn't vanish when the wind changes." He wrapped his arms around her, drawing her close. "You already have." She leaned into him, her cheek warm against his shirt. "Then let it be ours. Not just for this year or the next, for as many as come." He kissed her, slow and certain. No hesitation. No questions left between them. In the months that followed, the cabin grew. Yates added a second room with help from a neighbor who'd lost his own barn to lightning and was willing to trade labor for tools. Lark planted a small patch of herbs behind the cabin, and Ella started reading aloud by the fire each night, her voice growing stronger with every page. The land gave enough to feed them through the next winter. The barley was ground into meal, the squash cured and stored. Me stayed on as a steady presence, growing more family than neighbor, watching Ella when the weather or work pulled the others away. On a warm day in late summer, Yates and Lark stood beneath the cottonwoods, with me and Ella beside them, and spoke vows that needed no preacher. They exchanged nothing but words and hands, and it was enough. No fanfare. No crowd. Just the sound of the leaves above and the creek below, and the quiet joy of two people who had already chosen each other long before the first thaw. They lived on that land for the rest of their days, raising Ella and later, a son with Lark's eyes and Yates's quiet mouth. The seasons turned, each one bringing its own labor, its own grace. And through it all, every furrow dug, every fence repaired, every night spent by firelight they stayed as they were that day beneath the cottonwoods, whole and home and wholly each other's.